Just jumping on now for a bonus episode. My name's Glen James. I'm joined by Vince Scully. Welcome, Vince. You're dialing in remote to Newcastle.
G'day, Glenn. Doesn't come more remote than the North Shore of Sydney from Newcastle, does it?
That's right. So basically what's happened, I'll just date and timestamp this. We're recording it at 3:33 as I look over on my clock. The date is Wednesday, the 12th of March. Just today, the Trump White House announced that there are no concessions for the tariff on Australian steel and aluminium imports to the US. So we're going to have a chat about it. We're going to unpack what it means for the everyday person, and we're going to do so right after this disclaimer that this is general financial advice, T's and C's and all that. There's a full disclaimer in the description. And
fees, terms and conditions apply. Read the PDS.
That's right. So let's get into it. Rightio, I'm going to read a 10-point summary to set the scene of what's happened as at right now. Trump ignored Albanese's calls. So Prime Minister Anthony Albanese revealed that a former US president did not take his calls regarding the steel and
aluminum.
I read that wrong. Albanese revealed that US President Donald Trump did not take his calls regarding the steel and aluminum, as you said, Vince.
That's right.
Tariff.
We have to do it in millions of pounds rather than tons as well.
So there is a 25% tariff on Australian exports imposed by the Trump administration. Albo basically said it's unjustified and a violation of the long-standing US-Australia relationship. The Australian government used all available diplomatic channels, including the US Embassy and Ambassador K. Rudd, to seek an exemption, but was unsuccessful. And I dare say when Jim Chalmers was over there the other week, he probably threw a flag up the pole as well.
Probably did. But I wouldn't have thought the mighty K would have gone down too well in the White House.
No. In response, the Australian government is encouraging exporters to reduce the reliance on the US and will introduce a Buy Australian campaign in the March 2025 budget. There are concerns that other Australian exports, such as beef and pharmaceuticals, may also face trade tariffs by Trump. You've got to realise, and this is totally a side point, and everything that we say today is our opinions. If you want facts, go to a reliable source like The Guardian or ABC or Fox News, whatever you deem is your reliable source. I'm not a journalist. Vince is maybe a bit more of a journalist than I. You've got to understand, Trump doesn't like wars, but he does like trade wars. He's trying to stop international wars. He would rather have the economic war and a trade war. Peter Dutton blamed Albo for failing to secure an exemption, claiming that Dutto could have negotiated a deal with Trump. I think that's a bit
He'd
wishful.
have fixed it in 24 hours.
That's right. I think you're not right there, Peter. After the exemption was denied, the government took a firmer stance with Penny Wong, our foreign minister, calling the decision unprovoked and unjustified. Industry leaders worry that escalating tariffs could harm the broader Australian economy, urging patience and continued diplomatic engagement. And just some precedent, the Turnbull government in 2018, it took them 8 months to negotiate a tariff exemption with Trump, highlighting the complexity of such trade decisions. Now, Vinny, a couple of things there.
Yes, quite a couple of things there.
Trump's,
of course, go on.
No, Trump's doing a great job at wrecking a few economies, but this time's different. And I think there is this blanket rule. Here's an import tariff because Trump wants to make the USA great again, and return it to 1950, where we're making cars in America, the steel industries, America. It's this whole big thing. And at this time, it's easier to say blanket, no, trade, tariff, because if they say to Australia, yeah, we'll let you in the door, they're going to get knocked on the door from most other countries.
Yeah.
So I think it is a blanket one, and I think this time is different.
I think you're right. And of course, Australia is a pimple on the backside of the US. Aluminium imports, we make up about 0.5% of their consumption, just to put things in perspective. And so whether the US buys Australian aluminium or not is almost immaterial. The vast bulk of their imports comes from Canada, and that's obviously a lot closer. And ultimately, tariffs fall on the consumers in the country imposing it. So the Fox News view that this is a tax on China or a tax on Canada or a tax on Australia is just doesn't hold water. This is a tax on US consumers. And whatever that does, it's certainly not going to encourage them to spend. And so the real risk, if he goes further with this, is we get a US recession. And of course, when the US sneezes, the rest of the world catches COVID.
So just on that, I think let's talk about the concept of the tariff itself, so people who might not understand actually get a concrete understanding. So if, for example, there was a piece of aluminium, we'll call it a metre long or a kilo or 4 pounds or whatever, right? Whatever your unit of choice is.
6 nutmegs.
Six nutmegs of delicious nutty goodness. And that metre of aluminium cost the US, like if I had a company in the US selling aluminium boat trailers, right? And I wanted to buy a metre of aluminium, I know at the moment I can buy it from Australia for $100 because there's a free trade agreement, so there's no tariffs, okay? There might be a case where there is a US or a Canadian aluminium manufacturer and I can buy that same metre for, I'll just make a number up, Vince, like $105, a little bit more. So I know that I'll probably, or even the same to a point, I know that I'll just buy the Australian stuff. What happens is I've got my aluminium boat trailer company in America. What happens is the Trump takes office and says, all right, children, there is now a 25% tariff on imports of aluminium and steel from Australia. So me with my company, if I want to buy that same metre of aluminium from Australia, it's now $125. So what that means is a couple of things can happen. I could effectively suck it up, pay it, and not change my recommended retail price. How long are you going to be in business if you don't do that? Mm-hmm. 2, I increase my price that, yep, it is now, I'm selling this for $125, right? I've now got more of an incentive to buy the aluminium that is made in the US because it might be cheaper than what it was to buy from Australia. And effectively what happens, as you said, these tariffs, the end consumer ends up paying.
And particularly when it comes to things like aluminum and steel, because the US is a net importer. And so it has to be coming from somewhere. And if there's tariffs on everyone, it sort of affects everyone equally. So taking your analogy, it probably gives the local producer a license to increase their price by 20%. And so the end consumer ends up paying it. So the impact on the consumer at the end of the day is the difficult piece. But make no mistake about it, that's where the tax falls. Mm. And, the US is a huge importer of both steel and aluminum. In the context of Australia, our exports to the US are tiny. So in terms of...
But just on that, Vince,
yep.
And I will let you finish, it is important though because relatively tiny, but the crumbs off the master's table can be not superficial for us.
Sure. And the point I was going to make is that whilst for iron and steel, or steel and aluminum, this is minor beer. The real worry is, well, what's next? Is it agriculture? Is it all those other things is where it would really matter.
Yeah.
But just put it in context, we export $15.5 billion of bauxite, alumina, and aluminum, and we send about $300 million of aluminum to the US. So in terms of Australia's exports, this is a rounding difference.
Yeah.
And if it applies to everyone, the impact on trade should be fairly minor. The problem is what it does when it gets there and how this flows through to the US consumer and what they're going to do about it. Because if they're paying more for their Bud Light in an aluminum can, well, guess what? They're probably buying less Bud Light or buying less other things. But maybe because they're buying less Teslas, they have more money to spend on other things.
And that's it. When you look at these type of economics and tariffs, the economy is almost like pouring water on a footpath. It will find the cracks and it will normalize and just end up everything be more expensive, which I think the whole recession thing it could trigger a further spike in inflation. And, the Trump White House, I was literally watching a press release this morning, probably from yesterday. Their whole company line is, it's a transition period, it's going to get worse before it gets better, blah, blah, blah. But just on this whole thing, Vince, talk to us about the trade deficit that we have with the US and why that, and if we step now into some personal opinion and reactions, the US benefit more from Australia in almost every way of looking at it than we benefit from them. The only way we really benefit from them is if something happened, then again, ask Ukraine how this went, and we needed some help, the US would formally have reached over and pressed the go button and helped. So,
on the defence story,
is this our first political podcast?
I'm not sure actually on opposing sides on this one, but on when it comes to defence, the US needs us more than we need them because we have this unique position of being on this side of the world. So if you want to talk to satellites when they're over this part of the world or you want to launch missiles, well, guess what? You need a receiving station on this side of the world. And guess where that is? It's just outside Alice Springs.
Yeah, you might want to Google Pine Gap, everyone.
Or Exmouth.
Yeah.
Exmouth is a massive communication system for the US subs.
Yeah.
So the US needs us. They're not stationing Marines in Darwin or Catherine or wherever it is for their health.
Yeah, I think there's maybe up to 2,000 US military people in Australia at any one time.
Wow, I didn't know.
I'm just going to fact check myself as you finish, but yeah, that is one carve out that they need our plonk of real estate.
Yeah, and that's not going away.
No,
because that's laws of physics. You can't change that. The rest of it is sort of, we do run a trade deficit. That is, we import more from the US than we export to them. Much of that ends up powering our farms and mines. So a lot of it's farm machinery and industrial machinery. You can see the blips in the import graph when Qantas or the Air Force lands a plane. So they are material in intervals, but over the longer term, they're not that significant. But they do tend to be very lumpy. So that possibly would put us in a better position because we are one of the few countries where the US does run a trade surplus. And, one of the things that we do export to the US that's particularly important is Australian beef is lower fat than US beef. I think it's because we feed them on grass rather than on
pellets or
feedlots. And so it gets mixed with beef to make burgers in the US. So that's, I guess, the big picture item. So if the US is putting tariffs on everyone equally, maybe it's not that big a deal relative to everybody else. To my mind, there's two things at stake here. One is what the US consumer, how the US consumer reacts, and probably more importantly, what it means for the global trade system. I mean, much of the post-war, Second World War, that is, prosperity that the world has enjoyed has been built off the back of increasingly free trade.
Yeah.
And all you got to do is look at the difference of the interwar period, where everybody imposed massive trade barriers, and compare that to the 50s and onwards. Australia was slow in dismantling our protection. So, our car industry was built off the back of trade protections, and the residual of that, I guess, is the luxury car tax that was deliberately set to be the price of the most expensive domestically produced car. So Australia is a global leader or global leading proponent of free trade, and we have very few economic barriers. Some might argue that some of our quarantine rules are trade barriers in disguise, but that's probably a story for another day.
And I just want to maybe jump in and talk about the politics for 5 seconds, then we'll talk about stock market and markets. You've got to remember the whole trade thing. When we look at what China did to Australian red wine, they put huge import tariffs on, which basically meant the taps turned off. People in China aren't buying Australian wine. Just too expensive. Because guess what? It gets passed on to the end consumer. And if you step back and have a look at the politics of it all, once ScoMo's office went, and then I think Albo's crew went up there and like, hey, it's all good, boys, like we'll sort it out. They ended up lifting that tariff on wines. So I think when you look at it from the Chinese thing, it was probably a bit of a, oh, well, you want to play kitty? Well, let's play. And China have pretty much gone, all right, cop this. Now, when you look at that through the lens of Trump wants to really put his foot down in the world, he's literally just doing that on a world scale. America first, get stuff to Europe, look after yourself. This is what we're doing. And the problem we've got, Vince, this is like the first time ever where, and you can go down on rabbit holes and all this, the amount of debt or interest payments that the US makes on its sovereign debt is more than the military budget the US have. And they reckon that's a real tipping point for a major economy.
Have you listened to Niall Ferguson on this one?
No, should I?
Well, Niall Ferguson, the historian, he quotes a thing which he calls Ferguson's Law, which is not named after him.
No, that's the Ferguson's Law. This is exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Niall Ferguson makes this big deal about quoting Ferguson's Law, and he goes, not named after me, guys, but he is a major publicist of it. And the theory being that when your interest payments exceed your military budget, you're about to enter a large decline. And certainly the UK or Great Britain was a prime example of that. But of course, the US being the reserve currency of the world and able to print dollars till there's no tomorrow, the odds of that being a problem in the short term is very limited.
Yeah.
And just at the risk of saying yes, Vince, my dissertation at business school in 1986 was on the evils of the twin deficit, which at the time was worrying everybody in the US. I can't remember what the debt was at the time, but since then, and that's 40 years ago next year, the US has turned in 2 surpluses in that 40 years. And the world hasn't ended.
No, and this is why it can get a bit elementary, when politicians go out, and particularly we're about to come up into an election cycle. It's like, if the government was a household budget, they're running deficits every year, they're not a good household manager. Well, the economic theory is we can have debt, we grow the economy, inflate the debt out, make GDP bigger, and the debt isn't as big as a problem. Is that a real crass way to explain it?
No, I think that's right. I mean, governments are not households, and that's the key flaw in that argument, that in theory, that in order to have private wealth accumulation, you have to have a government sector deficit. That one's the flip side of the other. And so the constraint on government deficits is the ability to raise future taxes, the ability to get people to buy your debt, and the ability for that not to crowd out the consumer. So you can control inflation by either taxes or interest rates, and we tend to use the interest rate lever more than the tax lever.
Well, the Federal Reserve or the RBA, they're not responsible for taxes, so we'll let them make the hard decisions.
That's right. So,
but within all that, I think, the commentary out there, I think I said it when it first was proposed that if you were Albo, you would have got on the next plane and got up there. That maybe they're hearing through back channels that don't waste your time, send K-Ruds up there, send Chalmers. But I just honestly think it's not going to change this time because of everything I talked about.
I don't think it will, but I think the optics of it is that Alba could be perceived as not having done enough, precisely what you've done. This guy goes, buys a house down the road from you and then rents it out and doesn't show up in Washington when all the stuff is happening. This is potentially his I don't hold a hose moment.
Yeah.
So it's quite a dangerous time for Albo. And
I mean, Trump the last week wasn't picking up his calls.
Sure.
So probably wasted your time, but you would have went up there the minute that they were talking about it. But anyway, we're here now.
We are.
And just finally, I did have a look. There's an article here in the ABC. It was from last year in September. In 2022, the ABC revealed the RAF-based Tyndall outside of Katherine would host rotations of wrong paragraph. Darwin already hosts an annual rotation of up to 2,500 US Marines, and there are plans to increase that further.
Cool. Well, there you go.
So
that's a big number. I mean, I don't know how many boots on the ground, but 2,000 is 4,000 boots.
Yeah, a lot of boots. And if you had 2 sets of boots per soldier, spare boots, indoor boots, outdoor boots. Hey, we'll be back right after this, and we'll talk about the share market stuff.
Cool.
If you're after personal financial advice, don't get it from a podcast. If you would like help based on your own personal situation, head over to moneypodcast.com.au, click Get Help, and we'd be happy to introduce you to one of our trusted professionals. Our panel of vetted financial advisors and mortgage brokers work with people all over Australia so they can connect with you wherever you are. That's moneypodcast.com.au and click Get Help.
Over the last, probably 10 days, the markets are cooled down and come off, right?
Yeah.
And I did a reel on Instagram today, my whole premise was it's human nature to freak out when there's been an 8% drop in a week or 8% drop over 3 months or whatever the number is. But the more we understand and step back and understand with our investing is we don't commit money to equity markets if we need to cash out within 5 years. Now, yeah, sure, if I put $10,000 in equity in the IVV or A200 in January this year, it might say I don't know, $9,000. We may have it.
It might be a bit red. Yep.
Yeah, which sucks. Acknowledge that. But because we don't need to touch that for at least 5 years, hopefully, maybe 7 if you're going 100% equity, it shouldn't actually matter too much, because if you zoom out as at today and you look back 5 years, the ASX 200 has done 40%, pretty good. S&P 500 has done 140%, pretty good. We just need to understand that markets and economies have cycles, and we are probably moving into, faster than what we may have thought, thanks to the big orange man, a bit of a cycle, or of a few years, maybe 4, of some, the R word in America, recession, markets cooling off. Nvidia has dropped, friggin' Tesla's, down 40% or something, but that was, when you take your eye off it.
Might be to do with the quality of the product.
Yeah, but I don't know, all that to say, markets price stuff in. So I don't know if we're going to see another 10% fall in the next 2 months. We might, but no one knows, right? Like, what's your...
It is just pointless to seek to predict. As Peter Lynch said, more money is lost by investors preparing for downturns than in the downturns themselves.
Did you see Macquarie had a big haircut, I think last week or at the start of the week, because they've got a lot of stuff going on in the US?
The price has come off quite a bit.
Yeah.
So certainly CBA and Macquarie have given up a lot of their excess returns over the last few years. They were the only two of the banks that outperformed the S&P, not the S&P, the ASX 200 over the last decade, and they've given up a fair bit of that recently. But the point about investing in markets is, as you say, you've got to treat it as a long-term gain. And the thing that worries me most is younger investors who've never seen a downturn and therefore go, if some is good, more must be better, and are all in on IVV or VGS or whatever. Not only 100% equities, but 100 large cap equities and 100%, often 100% US equities, with a huge dollop of present bias, because over the last 5 years, the US market, you just gave the statistics, US markets outperformed the Australian market by a long shot. That's not true over 25 years.
But also, the numbers I gave, I probably should do a correction, Vince. That's just the price.
Okay.
It doesn't include earnings or yield.
Yeah, which of course would flatter the US.
Yeah.
But it's not true over 25 years, and it's not true over 125 years. So you do have to think about your horizon. And, everyone's an aggressive investor until they get smacked in the mouth with a decent downturn. And we've just lived through possibly the best 15 years in history. We've had low inflation, low interest rates, and high returns. Sure, we didn't get the tripling that we saw between 83 and 87, but that was accompanied by, it was off the real lows of 81, 82, and we also had mid-teens inflation. So it didn't look quite as good in real terms. So the last 15 years have been outstanding for equity investors. And people have, drunk the Kool-Aid of the cult of equities, and bonds are evil. Cash is, what's the word? Cash is trash. And I think, you don't want to be doing this in a reactionary way, but I think people do need to understand the power of diversification.
Bitcoin seems to have settled down a little bit.
It came off quite a bit over the last few days, didn't it?
Yeah. So I'm looking at it now, 81,000. Like, we're at a 15% 30-day low, 60-day 13%. I still, and this is just my own view, I still think, in 5 years' time, we'll be sitting here and Bitcoin will be over 150. Just because of the way of the world.
Could do.
Might not. I think so. I personally think, I'm going to put some more in at 80.
Mm-hmm.
Might be eating my words in 5 years and have nothing.
Might.
But that speaks to, if we just step back in wrapping up, because obviously we can talk for 2 hours and 40 minutes like the episode the other day. What does an investor do right now in this climate?
Learn to be mindful. But it is also, take the lessons from how it makes you feel, that you may not quite be as risk tolerant as you think you are. And it takes times like these to really understand yourself. So be mindful, listen to your stomach, listen to your brain, and take that lesson and then use that to tailor your investments going forward. Clearly, this is not a time for knee-jerk reactions. And as my good friend Nick Murray says, the decline is temporary, the advance is inevitable. And markets go up over time because world economies grow over time. And as economies grow, companies grow, and share prices are fundamentally about future earnings. So as earnings grow, values rise. The multiple you pay for those earnings moves around a lot more violently, and that's what we're seeing today. So people are looking at what's happening in the US and thinking, well, what happens if the US goes into recession? And that does things to the multiple people are prepared to pay for earnings. So that's what you're seeing today. That's not markets being irrational. That's markets pricing in new information as they get it. And tomorrow they'll get more information and the price will change. Whether that's up or down is anyone's guess.
If you were a great tennis player, Vince, you would say to me in this game of tennis we're having, what do you think, Glen?
Well, what do you think, Glen?
I reckon, number one, everyone, we don't really edit the podcast as heavy anymore. So any little producing on the fly you might hear because we're just streamlining processes. But I honestly think, what are you doing different this week as opposed to your strategy in December last year? I think the answer is nothing. You would continue our strategy. If we're buying every fortnight, we're doing that. We're definitely not selling down everything. We're definitely not getting scared and, I might do this. We're definitely not going, I've got 10 grand here, save for my house deposit. Now's a good time. I'm going to put that in the market. And we're literally keeping our strategy.
Yeah.
And if nothing has changed in your financial life and in your strategy, nothing changes. Your strategy is not based on whether the S&P goes up 0.7 or down 0.7 of a day.
Yeah. I mean, the portfolio is only there to support the plan. And if the plan doesn't change, there's no reason for the portfolio to change unless something in the plan changes. And one of those things might be you do now realize that you're not quite as risk tolerant as you thought you were. And so now you should be using your extra money to reposition your portfolio and going forward, well, maybe I should be buying some more gold or some more bonds.
Okay, so that's a good one, Vince. So maybe if you're like, this really scares the crap out of me, my portfolio is in the red and it's down 15%, I don't love that. Maybe that new money that you've got each month, you might say, I think it could be prudent to buy a little bit of gold. I think it could be prudent to buy in a bit of a bond profile. Yep. So we're not theoretically selling down our growth portions, but we're just putting new money into a defensive portion.
So that's one of the big things. And
keep your mitts off your super.
That's right. But you do have to be, you are the biggest filter between the market and your pocket. So the market delivers the returns. How much of it ends up in your pocket is down to your behavior, taxes and fees. So learn to control number one.
Love it. Well, there you go, everyone. That is what we think. The opinions and comments are worth what you paid for them. You can learn more about Vince and the Life Sherpa Invest platform, because we've been talking about that lately. You can just Google Life Sherpa Invest. If you need an investing solution, minimum $5,000 entry, the platform will effectively take care of everything.
Thanks for that, Glenn.
There you go. You didn't even have to pay for that, Vince. Not that you paid for any of it, but is it.
I pay for it with the chance of going to jail one day.
Yeah, from me saying bad stuff. But we will leave it there. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, you need a plan. It can't be too complex. My plan is give some, save some, and spend some. And my question to you in your financial life is, what is your plan? Vince Scully, thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Glen James, thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. If you want to support us, there is one way you can do that. You can send the episode to a friend, a family member, or your group chat if you think those people would find it valuable. We also thank you for leaving a review on Apple or Spotify. If you've listened to this podcast for some time, or if you've read any of my books, you would know that giving and generosity in a financial sense is a big thing in my life. If you think it's time that you are ready to give financially to a good cause, you could head to our website, moneypodcast.com.au/charities to see the charities that we support.
Any advice is general financial advice only, which does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. Because of that, you should consider if the advice is appropriate to you and your needs before acting on the information. If you do choose to buy a financial product, read the product disclosure statement, PDS, and target market determination, TMD, and obtain appropriate financial advice tailored to your needs. Simo Interactive Pty Ltd, the publisher of this podcast, and Glen James are authorized representatives of Money Sherpa Pty Ltd, which holds Financial Services License 451289. Opinions or comments from any guests on the podcast are theirs and not those of the host or the publisher or their respective license holders.